New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here, and I want to welcome you to this week's episode of The Inclusive Church. Yes, a couple of things I always say at the top, just in case you happen to be watching for the very first time. Number one, I'm the author of the book Stained Glass Spirit, Becoming a Spiritual Community Where Oneness Does Not Require Sameness. And in this show, we do two things. One, we're talking with leaders about what are actual things you can do once you understand why inclusion is important, and once you are committed to creating a spiritual community that demonstrates harmony and unity and oneness. Like, okay, I got it, but what do I do? And so every week we talk about ideas and themes, or we respond to questions that people have asked, which is what today's show is going to do. And we do that in the context that we are reclaiming the word church. So often when people say or hear the word church, they think of a piece of property or building that has walls and the architecture of it. And we in this show and in the upcoming book are reclaiming church as a word that describes a group of people who come together to study spiritual principle and then to use those principles and practices in their everyday lives in the world. And that the ministry is designed to support that. And the church is that actually happening. And if we, excuse me, if we didn't learn anything else during COVID and the pandemic, we learned that we've got to stop saying the church is a building. It's a group of people and how they come together and what they do. And then the other piece is the show really is about leadership. But I'm not just talking to ministers. I'm talking to any and everyone who sees themselves as someone who is influencing the direction of the church they are participating in. Just anyone and everyone who volunteers to make that church community actually work. And so if you volunteer as a greeter, if you are serving on a board, if you are someone who takes classes, if you are someone who writes a check or two and provides financial support for the spiritual community you're a part of, then you are a leader. So now, having said all of that, what are we going to talk about today? And if you want to say hello in the chat, I would love that as well. And hello, and where are you dialing in from or watching from? Whether you're watching live or watching the recording. So hey, Anita, so happy to see you. I can see someone else on YouTube. I can see someone is there on Facebook. So you don't have to say hello, but please know I'm happy that you are here. And throughout our brief time together today, please feel free to put comments or questions in the chat or in comments on YouTube, depending on which platform you're on, and I will be happy to just kind of weave that in. I love it when you give your own examples or when you have questions. So, forgiveness. How does it happen that we are talking about forgiveness today? So, someone I was in a conversation with, as this happens so often, right? I'm talking to someone and they ask a question or they make a comment, and then in my head, it's like, ooh, that would be so good to talk about an inclusive church. And so the conversation was related to forgiveness. And when we first started the conversation, the person I was talking to was asking about asking for some support for forgiving the way they had been treated based on their identity group. And it started off as a conversation about spiritual practice and the practice of forgiveness. And we had a really, really good conversation about, forgiveness being one of the ways that as humans we express love, and forgiveness as being one of the demonstrations of our understanding of oneness and forgive, right? So we were having this great conversation, but it did start in the context that they are a part of an identity group that has been discriminated against, that has been treated unfairly, and just their entire life or their entire adult life, they've been angry about how they were treated and how others in their identity group was treated. And so it's like that personal work of how do I, if I want to stand in spiritual principle and I want to be a person who is loving and kind, like how does forgiveness work when many of the ways that I have been treated badly are still happening either to me directly or to other people who are in the same identity group that I'm in. So, you can take this wherever you want to. You could think of, the identity group of race or ethnicity, right? You could think of the identity group of people who identify as LGBTQ plus. You could look at the identity group or consider how someone in an identity group based on age, being very young or being older or elderly might feel they need to forgive others for how they have been treated. And then we did that work and it was really good. And yes, I think it is so important for us to talk about the role forgiveness plays in general. And then that conversation shifted to how do I forgive myself for the mistakes I've made with people in other identity groups? And or things that I've said that were unkind, or the way that I kind of ignored, I didn't know how to have a conversation, and I didn't even know I maybe needed to have a conversation with someone, but I really had been judging them based on their identity group. And I could ask them for forgiveness and they probably would say yes, but I I feel guilty because I didn't do better or I didn't know better. And so, how do I forgive myself? So, we went from forgiving like the big picture systemic in our society, we treat people badly, to wait, I also do that personally with other people. So, in an inclusive community, I think it is really important that we begin to have some conversation about forgiveness. So often, what happens is that we end up in these conversations and we only talk about them from a political point of view and from a power point of view. And so we are like, yes, oppression is bad and it shouldn't exist, but it does. And you should be angry and you should fight and you should protest. Now, anybody who knows me knows that I am all in favor of organized protests and demonstrations and action being taken on a collective level to change systems. I don't have anything against that at all. And when we're doing our spiritual work, right, sometimes we have to remember we're not just doing it for political reasons. We are taking action because we have committed to be an example of the kind of person we want to see in the world. We take action because we want to be helping to build a church, a community, a city, a state, a nation, a world where people are treated with respect and dignity and their uniqueness is valued. All of that is for me at the base level, right? And at the heart level of all of this conversation. And so when we do that, then it is like, oh, the system exists. And in order to be a part of the change, I have to forgive how it got the way it is. Right? I have to know how it got to be the way it is. And I need to forgive the generations of people who have brought us to where we are today so that I can be all in on helping to shift the focus and the energy to the world that I want to see tomorrow for myself if I'm still alive or for others. And so that made me think about, as I was thinking through this after the conversation was over, it made me think about a book that I hadn't pulled off the shelf in a while. And I probably, between now and September, like over the next 8 to 10 weeks, I will probably reread much, if not all, of this book. And it is Desmond Tutu's There Is No Future Without Forgiveness. No future without forgiveness. And of course, if you know the story or if you know who Desmond Tutu is, um, he was awarded or recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize in 1984 or 5. Um, and that primarily came from the work that he did as part of the Truth and Reconciliation work in South Africa after apartheid was ended. And in the book cover, inside book cover, it reads, "The Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa has put the spotlight on all of us. In its hearings, Desmond Tutu has conveyed our common pain and sorrow, our hope, and our confidence in the future." And Desmond Tutu was the president of the chair, was the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And as a former archbishop, had both religious and political input into the design of how all of the experience of everybody throughout, everyone who was affected came forward and was equally heard, accepted, and forgiven. So when he writes about there is no future without forgiveness, I think he does give us maybe not a specific model, but definitely a mindset that is important for us to think about if we are trying to change that. Not if we're trying to, but if we are committed to creating a community where there is no us versus them. There are not a lot of things that set me off more than people coming from an us versus them mindset when the goal is for us to work together. Like, yes, let's acknowledge our differences. Let's acknowledge our different needs, our different expectations, our different experiences, our different desires for how the future looks. But to acknowledge it, we have to hear it. So we have to hear from everyone from different perspectives and then demonstrate our commitment to build something new together. And, this doesn't always happen in our spiritual communities. Often, what happens is one or two people or a small group of people decide, well, this is what we think is best. And then basically just kind of make that happen or force it to happen, maybe without even hearing what some other options might be. So, in our inclusive churches, we can't always hear every option on every single issue, opportunity, program, class, or event. Okay, so I know that. Realistically, we can't hear everything from every stakeholder or stakeholder group on every single topic. But we want to build a pattern of hearing from a wide variety of people and actually searching out those who may have different views or experiences, because that's where the juice is. That's where we hear ideas that we ourselves would never have thought of because we didn't come from that background, or we didn't have that experience, or we weren't involved in the church 15 years ago. Or, right? It's like, oh, we want to collect as much information as we can before we start then honing down to what might we choose or prioritize. And in order to do that, we have to forgive the stories that either we made up or we somebody else made up and told us about who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. And it's easy to see this when you're looking at somebody else's community, right? Because it's over there. You weren't involved in it. And sometimes it's really a challenge to do that in our own communities. So there is no future without forgiveness. And if you have not ever read any of this book, I can highly recommend it. It may be that it comes up in another inclusive church episode sometime in the next 8 weeks, because as I'm reading it, I, I'm sure I'll get at least one or two ideas for future shows. In chapter 7 in this book, the chapter title is We Do Want to Forgive, but We Don't Know Whom to Forgive. Like when something has become so systemic in our culture or in our way of engaging, we don't know exactly like who to forgive. Or another way to think of it is we don't know who to blame because we want to blame someone before we forgive them. And one of the things I want to remind you and myself is that we can forgive the condition. We don't have to know the names of the people. And even if we think we do know, oh, who was the minister when that happened? Or what was going on in our city at the time that that decision was made? Or who was the president and who was in their administration when that happened. We think we need to have a specific person or group, but we don't. We can forgive the condition and all that contributed to bringing that tradition or that condition into existence. Remember, in New Thought, we know that we're all connected, and we know that everything that happens is the result of mental thought, mental conditioning, and the habits that have resulted from that. So I don't have to have a specific name. I don't have to have a specific inciting incident, because many of the conditions that create barriers to inclusion are not the result of just one simple or discrete action or activity. They're the result of either an unconscious or subconscious habitual pattern, or they're the result of decades, if not centuries, of social norms. And so, in order to change the future, I don't have to know all the details about the past. But if I know there's a condition that is existing, that trans women are being, especially trans women of color, are disproportionately subjected to violence and death, then that's the condition that I'm going to create a new vision and begin a trajectory moving toward that truth that trans women are safe in the world, safe to express themselves, physically safe as they live their lives. Like, I can create, this is where we're going, and then begin to do spiritual practice and physical work toward that goal. So in this chapter 7, we do want to forgive, but we don't know whom to forgive. And the first paragraph in this chapter reads like this, quote, "As I sat listening to the testimony of those who came to the commission to tell us their stories, often of unbearable suffering, and as I considered some of the evidence that has been revealed in the applications for amnesty by those who committed some quite horrendous atrocities, I caught myself asking whether God did not sometimes wonder why he had ever created us. What in the name of everything that is good ever got into me to create that lot?" And it makes me smile when I read this again, because, maybe you're like me, and what, like Desmond Tutu, sometimes, even though God is not just a human being, like, superhuman being, sometimes in order to just get into something, you have to think, well, if God was human, what would he be saying? What would she be doing? How would they be reacting to what's going on right here, right now? So when Desmond Tutu, writes that he could imagine Spirit saying, "What in the name of everything is good ever got into me to create that group of people?" Like, what? And so when you are able to step into that, then you're able to go, okay, for whatever reason that this happened, this occurred, and we have this condition in the world today, I'm here for a reason. And I'm here to stand in principle and help to create something new for myself, something new for the people I come into contact with, something new for our church, something new for the world. And in order to do that fully, I've got to forgive what created the condition. What or whom created the condition. And then that frees up my mental and emotional energy to move my focus toward where I want to go. So that's my message today. If you're a regular, you know that when I don't have a featured guest where we're having a conversation, I try to, keep it to a toolkit focus around 30-ish minutes. And so the tool to have in your toolkit going forward this week is to really notice, when are your opportunities to be forgiving? And notice, when are you needing to forgive the system or the bigger results, society? And when are you needing to simply forgive yourself for things that you have done or said that were not in support of inclusion for other people, especially in your spiritual community, in your church? The conversation that I referred to earlier, I was having with a member of my home spiritual community. And that conversation, there was a part of it near the end where the conversation was specifically about how being in our spiritual community laid the foundation and opened the door for this person to even recognize that they were being unintentionally unwelcoming to people who they were a little uncomfortable with, and that their discomfort was so automatic, or their judgment was so automatic, that they didn't even recognize it as such. They were protecting their own comfort and not having any idea of the impact it was having to make someone else feel unseen, unvalued, and unwelcome. And so I want you to be willing to have that kind of conversation, and over time see how your conversations change people and provide more awareness, so that the majority of people in your community, the majority of the time, do feel that this spiritual community is their church home. My name is Tracy Brown, and this is Inclusive Church. I really hope that you will join me again next Tuesday, every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time. We are here just to go a little bit deeper with this idea that now is the time, and we are the people to create inclusive spiritual communities. Have a good week. I'll see you again soon.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.